Book of Malachi. I'm going to take your Bibles out and turn over there. Book of Malachi. We are doing the same series that the kids are studying in the back. And this just so happens to be the very last lesson in this series. So next week when we start, we'll start with number 1. But what we've basically been studying is kind of the chronological order of the kings and the prophets. And so Malachi he's the last prophet that comes before Jesus Christ. And he kind of fits in. I know for most of you, it's probably not going to make much sense, but for you adults who've been in here, he kind of fits in that time frame where we were studying about Nehemiah and Ezra. And so it seems like about, Nehemiah chapter 13, Nehemiah comes back and everything that has kind of been put into order is messed up again. Everybody's doing what they not supposed to be doing and what they promised they wouldn't do anymore. And so it seems like Malachi kind of appears on the scene about that time and tries to do some reforming. Question number 1 on your handout in our adult class, we usually do kind of a discussion or a think about it question. I always tell them it's generally just to wake everybody up and kind of get our motors in gear. I know it's hard on Wednesday nights sometimes to get the same attention span as you might have on a Sunday morning or something. But the question is this: have you ever felt like you were being taken for granted or treated disrespectfully? Anybody ever experienced that before?
All of us.
And I would say, yeah, probably all of us at one time or another. It could be something that's work related. A lot of times it's your job. Maybe if you're the boss, you're not feeling like people are appreciating you or maybe trying to take advantage of you or something like that. If you're the worker, you might feel the other way around. You might feel like your boss is trying to take advantage of you or just not treating you in a respectful way. I think it's true also in relationships, don't you? I think sometimes, just speaking from a parent perspective, sometimes you think your children, don't appreciate you. And you think about, I brought them into this world and I take care of them and, put food on their table and clothes on their backs and, pay their car insurance and all those things. And they just don't treat us like, we deserve to be treated. And children, sometimes children feel that way toward parents. Feel like, parents are just treating them in an unfair way and not respecting them, not respecting their lives, things like that. So, probably all of us understand that feeling. And the question really becomes a little bit more than just have you been treated that way, but how does it make you feel when somebody, doesn't appreciate you, doesn't respect you, doesn't acknowledge you, just takes you for granted? I didn't talk about the spouse relationship, did I? We won't go there. Scott's pulling the plug on me. How do you feel when you're treated that way? Make you feel good?
No.
Yeah, usually I would say we're probably a little bit upset, aren't we? We might even experience the emotion of anger. And so we understand what it feels like to be in a situation like that. And the reason that I bring that question to the table is because that's basically, if I had to kind of summarize the book of Malachi, that's the way I would summarize it. God is telling Israel how he feels because they're not respecting him. They're taking advantage of him and they're taking him for granted. And so basically it's kind of a book that's about what God feels like and what God's going to do because the children of Israel have treated him in this disrespectful way. And we've got it divided up in our handout. We've got it divided up into 3 different categories. The first one we're going to talk about are the priests of the day of Malachi. Then we're just going to talk about the people or the public in general, and then we'll talk about what little time probably we'll have left, the faithful few. So let's talk a little bit about these priests that were in office during the days of Malachi. You read in Malachi chapter 1, God launches a complaint against Israel. And if you read verses 6 and 7 there, what does God complain about there? And rightfully so.
They didn't offer the best they had, they give him second best.
Yeah. And really he starts out in a way, though, I think all of us can probably understand, or maybe most of us. But he compares it to the idea of a parent. You know, God says, if I'm a father, then where's my honor? Where's my respect? And I think, again, all of us can kind of understand that from a standpoint, those of us who are parents, you know, there's a level of respect that we expect, even demand from our children. And part of the reason is because we're their parents, right? We're the ones who, like it said, brought them into this world. We're the ones who take care of them. We're the ones who protect them. We're the ones who give them good advice, you know, and offer guidance for them in this life. And so there's a level of respect and honor that we deserve and that we expect to receive from our children. Now you think about here back in the Old Testament, did the Israelites have any commandments that related to respect toward parents? Okay, what's the commandment? We all know it, right?
Honor the father and mother.
Yeah, honor your father and your mother. And there was a promise, or at least one promise, that was attached to that commandment. Do you remember what that promise was? Yeah, if you want to live a long life and you want to have a peaceful life, honor your father and your mother. Now, we know in the New Testament, Ephesians chapter 6, that same promise is brought over, isn't it? And I always try to illustrate it in this way. You know, generally speaking, this is one of those proverbs or one of these commandments that you got to take it in a general way. It's not true in every instance. But a good parent, what is a good parent going to do for their children? They're going to do everything within their power to help them, aren't they? They're going to do everything within their power to make sure that they have all the things that they need physically. They're going to do everything within their power to make sure that they train them in the right way, in a spiritual way, bring them up right. They're going to do everything within their power to try to make sure that at the end of their life, they're going to have heaven as their eternal home. That's a general principle, right? Are all parents good? You didn't have to laugh, but no, they're not, are they? Not every parent is a good parent. Not every parent is going to look out for their children physically. In fact, some of them are going to abuse their children physically. Not every parent is going to try to train them in the way that God says is right. Not every parent is thinking about the eternity of their children. But generally speaking, this is a principle. You know, your parents are going to do what's good for you. And if you listen to your parents, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah, it's an easy question, right? It's a good thing. And, you know, if you're a good parent, are you going to tell your child to do something that's going to endanger them physically? No. You're not going to tell them now, you know, why don't you run out there and play in the middle of the street? Don't worry about cars. You don't have to worry about it today. Now, no good parent would say that. But if you're a good parent, you're going to say, don't play in the middle of the street, right? And if you do go out in the street, you have to cross the street, and you better watch out for cars. And that's just a general principle that as parents, we're going to tell our children things that are good for them. And so it's a general proverb. If you listen and do what your parents tell you to do, you're going to live longer, right? Now, is that true in every instance? No. There's still accidents, there's still disease, there's still sickness in this world. But generally speaking, that is a principle. And so in the Old Testament, the children of Israel knew that principle. You know, they knew that there was a great promise that was attached to that idea of honoring your parents, honoring your mother and your father. There was also a penalty that was attached to it, wasn't there? Anybody remember what the penalty was?
Not a long life and not prosperous.
Yeah, and even more specific, if you had an obstinate child, just a child who refuses to listen to their parents, their parents tell them what to do, they ignore it, they take them aside, they try to correct them, they try to make them do what's right or help them do what's right, and the child just obstinate and insistent that they're not going to do it, then they were supposed to be stoned, weren't they? There was capital punishment for not honoring your mother and your father. So it's just a principle here that God is talking about. If earthly parents are due that level of respect, what do you think God, the Father of all, what level of respect is due toward him? Yeah, we're talking about even more than our earthly parents, right? And so he says, you guys understand this. You practice this principle. Children honor their parents. If I'm a father, where's my honor? Where's my respect? And then he also talks about the idea of a master, right? Israel was obviously the servants of God. They were his children, but they were also his servants. God was their master. We have that same relationship today, don't we? We're God's servants. God is our master today. What does a master deserve?
Respect and obedience.
Respect and obedience. Yeah. And when you look at Israel here at this point, they had no love for God. They had no honor for him. They had no respect for him. They certainly weren't obeying the things that he told them to do. And so God is laying down this foundation. That's the complaint of the book of Malachi. If I'm a father, where's my honor? If I'm a master, then where's the respect and the obedience that is due toward me? So he talks about how these priests have despised his name. Question number 3 here on your handout. I think Larry kind of mentioned this a little bit here, but how are the priests implicated in these disgraceful worship practices that were taking place? What was their part in all this?
The offerings weren't being given right.
Okay, the offerings weren't what they were supposed to be. Somebody over here say something?
Bad sacrifices.
Yeah, bad sacrifices. And think about this too. The priest, when you talk about spiritual responsibility, what level of spiritual responsibility would you say the priest had? They should have had the highest level, right? These were the guys who were supposed to be teaching everybody else how to obey God's law. And so God paints this picture, instead of living these exemplary lives before the people, they weren't even keeping God's commandments themselves. And not only were they not keeping God's commandments, but they were also encouraging the people not to do it too. And so they're a major fault in what's going on in this day and age. Somebody mentioned a couple times the sacrifice. They were allowing defiled sacrifices to be offered on the altar. What kind of animal was supposed to be offered on the altar? Perfect. Right? And by perfect, we mean this. It had to be a certain age. Right? It had to be of a certain outward appearance. Not spotted, not speckled. Those things were not part of what God wanted. There were levels to an animal sacrifice of completeness or perfectness that had to be accomplished before they would be offered upon the altar. And why was that? Because we obviously know, right? Did the blood of animals take away man's sin? So why'd they have to be perfect?
That's what God wanted. Like Jesus was perfect.
Yeah, all those things in the Old Testament were a shadow of things to come. They were a shadow of the perfect lamb that was going to be offered for man's sacrifice one day on the altar, and all man's sin be taken away. So if you start offering all these defiled animals, what kind of picture does that paint of Jesus? Not a very good one, right? And so you can kind of understand why God is so upset in all these things. And here's a criteria that he laid down. He said, if you have any questions about whether you should offer this to me or not, take it to your governor and see if he likes it or not. And I was kind of thinking about how do you apply that today in our modern language? But again, because I planned for adult class, I kind of got adult illustrations here. But this is the way what I would kind of put it into context today. If what we're giving God, if we've got a question about what we're giving God would be acceptable or not, go try to give the same effort to your boss. Okay, if the boss says be here at 9:45, what time do you go be here? You better be here a little bit early. but be here by at least 9:45, right? Well, what if you showed up at 10? Would your boss be okay with that?
Oh, yeah.
Would he say, "Oh, no big deal. I know I told you to be here at 9:45, but you came in at 10." No. You think about it in this way. Let's say the boss says, today we're going to have a meeting. We're going to go over this report. And here you are in this meeting, and while he's going through the things on this report, you're scrolling through your phone. Or you're doodling, you're making drawings, or maybe you even fall asleep. Think your boss would be all right with that? He'd say, that's good effort on your part. That's okay. But, I say those things to kind of, take it up another notch or another level, but we understand that, don't we? We got no problem seeing that point of it. Do you think God would be pleased with things like that? If it wouldn't please a man, that's what he's saying here about this sacrifice, these offerings. Take it to your governor. You think he'd be pleased with this sacrifice? You think he'd be honored by this animal? Why do you think God would then? Because when we're talking about the level of God and the level of man, we're talking about another level, aren't we? And so if anything, the effort that we put into our jobs, the effort that we go to in our hobbies, when it comes to God's level, you got to amp it up a notch, okay? Not the same, go above. Certainly not going below here. But they thought, well, these things are good enough for God, right? No big deal. Malachi tells them there, though, in verses 8 through 10, he actually tells them it'd be better for you guys to shut the doors of the temple and to stop offering sacrifices to God than to keep on doing what you're doing. Why is that the case? Yeah, if you don't serve God with everything, what are you serving God? No. You're not going to get any, good job or attaboy or a pat on the back from God. And so he said, if you guys are just going to try to play religion around here, act like you're serving God, but in reality, you're not doing what God told you to do, you'd be better off to shut the doors and just shut down all the sacrifices. Because God is not going to be pleased with such an effort. So he's pretty hard on the priest of that day and age, isn't he? We've talked a little bit about here, question number 4, the attitude of the priest. If a man promised to sacrifice, not every offering and sacrifice in the Old Testament was mandatory. Some of these offerings were voluntary. And so sometimes you would have people who would volunteer, make a vow maybe, and say, if this happens, then I'm going to give God this. I'm going to sacrifice this animal to God. Well, here's a man, he's made a vow, he's made a promise, and instead of bringing what he promised, which was a unblemished animal, he looks through his herd and he says, well, this one over here is going to die in a couple of days anyway, let's just take him in. And when they get there, the priest said, you know what, that'll work. No problem, we'll accept that sacrifice. And so back home he has this perfect sacrifice that he's vowed to God. Instead, he's brought something that is much less than what God deserves and what he's promised. And the priest doesn't hold his toes to the fire, right? He just says, okay, that's good with us. If that's what you want to offer to God, then we'll accept that instead of what you promised him. But they actually encourage the people to worship God in a very careless and disrespectful manner. And so God has some pretty harsh words for them here in this first part of the book of Malachi. Let's go a little bit into chapter 2 here. That's kind of chapter 1, but this is question 5 on your handout. how had the priests failed in keeping and applying the law? Not only in sacrifices, right? What else?
They hadn't taught the law like they were supposed to be teaching.
Yeah, and in fact, let's see if I can see it here real quickly. Should have put my glasses on.
They had caused people to stumble because of the incorrect teaching.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's not the verse I'm looking for. I can't even remember. Oh, back in chapter 1 and verse 13. It says here, you say also, this is what the priest was saying, oh, what a weariness. What do you think of me as a preacher if I got up here and I started telling you about the commandments of God and said, these things are ridiculous? You know? Why in the world would anybody do what God told them to do? They're too much. They're a burden. Too hard for us to bear. What would you think of me as a preacher?
You need to get a different mind.
Yeah, I'm in the wrong occupation, right? But that's what these priests were doing about the commandments of God. You know, oh man, look at this commandment of God. What a weariness it is to keep this thing. And I think in part what was going on is, remember economically, what was the state of Israel at this time economically?
Bad economically.
Well, they just come back, and did they have a lot of resources personally?
Personally, no. The king can settle.
Yeah, the king kicked all the resources to rebuild the wall, to rebuild the city, rebuild Jerusalem, offer sacrifices. He did all that. But personally, they didn't have a lot. I mean, they'd just come out of captivity, a lot of them, right? Come back to their homeland, kind of reestablish themselves. And I think what was happening is the priests were kind of looking on the people economically, and they were saying, this is too hard. You know, it's too much to give God the best that you have here if you don't have a lot. But it's a principle that we need to remember as Christians. When does God deserve the best and the first? All the time, right? Does it matter what my economic condition is? Does that mean God doesn't deserve the best and the first then all of a sudden? Now I can bring him a different sacrifice and he'll be accepted or be okay with that? Because that's what they were doing, right? They're bringing him the lame, the blind, the sick, and they were saying, this is what we're going to offer to God. But I think that's part of probably the background of why the priests were talking about these commandments so much, the economic conditions in that day and age. But it led to a very, careless and disrespectful way of trying to worship God. Let's see here. So question number 6 is this. Israel was guilty of giving God leftovers. How does God deal with us whenever we give him less than our best?
Thankfully, not the way he did back then.
Yeah, but ultimately, how is he going to deal with us?
We paid the price.
We're going to pay the price, aren't we? And so it's always, we read these Old Testament stories, and I always say, these are God's people. I mean, the same problems they experienced are the problems we're going to experience today. Same difficulties, but it's good for us to stop from time to time and kind of give ourselves a reality check. And, kind of ask ourselves some of these questions that God was laying out before his children in the Old Testament times. But, are we half-heartedly serving the Lord? Had they quit worshiping God? No, they were still showing up, weren't they? They were still bringing offerings and sacrifices, but they were given less than the best. They could have given a better effort, couldn't they? Certainly could have given in better sacrifices. And what was God's reaction? Well, God said it'd be better to just shut the doors and stop worshiping if you think I'm going to be pleased with an effort like that. But I always tell you guys this. When I study these things, it's personal to me first. And honestly, I've got to check. I got to look at my life and ask myself that question. Am I giving God my best effort? Am I giving him my best effort when it comes to preaching his word, when it comes to studying, when it comes to singing? All those things are important. And if we're not giving God our best, are we giving what God asked him to give us? No. But, in modern day language, I think he would tell us if that's the situation, shut the church doors and quit trying to play church. You ever played church when you were a kid? I remember, of course, there were 4 of us in my family, but I can remember times when we would go play church. We would go get the grape juice and the crackers, and we'd sing, and then we'd have the communion, and we'd have a sermon, and we'd end with a prayer. Outwardly, if you were looking at it, you would say, well, that's the church service there, right? But we weren't really conducting worship services. We were playing church. And I think that's what we do sometimes, don't you? I think we give God less than our best effort, and God says, you're doing that, you're kidding yourselves. I'm not going to be pleased with that. And stop playing church and start doing what I told you to do. But it's a good reality check. Let's be sure we're giving God what he deserves. So that's the priest. And then the focus of Malachi shifts over to the people. Question number 7 here. How had God's people broken? I've got faith in here. It should be the covenant. Sometimes when I do these questions, I think 2 steps ahead. I do that when I write my sermons too, and I write something I was thinking about instead of what I should, and then I go back and read it. It doesn't make any sense. But how had God's people broken the covenant with him?
No part of it they had been marrying as they should marry, and then they was having divorces.
Yeah.
Those 2 things that really caused them problems.
Yeah, that really covers question 8 too here. But the first thing you read about is they were intermarrying with these foreign people, these nations that God told them not to. And so ask yourself this question: were they serving God? Is that the way that you serve God, by disobeying a commandment, by doing something he tells you not to do? Is that the way you honor him? Is that the way, you're supposed to show your respect toward him? The additional evidence, like Larry mentioned there in question number 8, not only were they intermarrying with these foreign nations, but they were also divorcing at an alarming rate. They're breaking their vows that they made to God, to their wives. And basically, if you want to just boil it down, they were treating God's law for marriage like they were nothing, like they didn't even exist. And so again, you can understand God's frustration. Am I your master? Am I your father? Where's the honor? Where's the respect? Where's the obedience? Then you go on, you read about their state. Not only were they doing that, but Malachi says, then you run to the altar and you start crying and because you're not getting what you want. And you can't understand why. We're not like that today, are we? I think, again, you read about the struggles of humanity. We're very similar to, we're going to experience the same difficulties that these people experience. But there is a very strong verse here, and it's one that I think probably more than any other in the Bible that expresses God's view of divorce. But when you read Malachi 2:16 here, is there any question in your mind about how God feels about divorce? What does he say there? He hates. Can you think of anything else in the Bible that God hates that you would say, God will probably be all right with it? Go to Proverbs chapter 6, read verses 16 through 19. The 6 things that God hates, 7 are abomination to him. Any of those you read about, would you say, I bet God would be okay with this? There's no doubt the way God feels about those things, right? And so Malachi points out, it's about as clear of a stance as God can take on divorce, but he hates it. And I don't have time tonight, but if I did, I'd go I know a lot of times people always have questions about marriage, divorce, and remarriage, and I think the easiest place to answer all those questions is where Jesus answered them in Matthew 19. I always say this, but do you know where Jesus went to talk about marriage and divorce? He didn't go to the law of Moses. He didn't go to any of these patriarchal stories in the Bible. Where'd he go?
To himself.
Well, yeah, but he went all the way back to Adam and Eve, didn't he? I mean, did you read? He says, did you read about the beginning? Not after everything got messed up, but did you read about the beginning? How God made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall man leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. And so the beginning is God's picture of marriage, right? And in the beginning, how many men were there? There's one. How many women were there? There was one. Two were made one, right? Not three, not four. Two were made one. One man, one woman for life. That's the way God viewed it. And then the Pharisees say, well, you know, what about the law of Moses? What about divorce? And Jesus said that was the hardness of man. But from the beginning, that's not the way it was. Is there exception that God allows for divorce and remarriage? Yeah. Does it mean he loves divorce? I don't even know that it would mean God prefers it in that particular context. But he does allow for it, doesn't he? And that is for cause of fornication. So, yeah, you know, you talk about divorce, there's no question how God feels about it. And the reason that it's so important, and this is one thing that Jesus says, I think in verse 6 of Matthew 19, but he says what God has joined together. There's actually, they're not going that deep. He just said, don't let man put it apart. But in the original, it literally means man can't separate it. There's nothing that a man can do to separate it. And the old timers, I say the old timers, I'm kind of old timer now, but the old timers used to preach a lesson. Some of you may have heard of what God has joined together. And it wasn't about necessarily marriage, but it's about things in the Bible that God put together. And they would talk about how Jesus and the church, God put them together. Can a man separate them? Well, he can pretend like they're not together, but does it break them apart? Not in the mind of God, right? Baptism and salvation. Has God joined those two things together? Water baptism and salvation. Can a man separate them? Well, he can say they're separate, right? But are they really separated? Not in the mind of God. And that's really, when it comes down to marriage, that's really the key of all things, because God is the one who puts the two together. Did God join those two together? Are they husband and wife? If God didn't join them together, guess what? They're not husband and wife. They're not in a relationship, regardless of what man might call it. Somebody might say, well, this is my wife or this is my husband. But if God didn't join them together, in the mind of God, they're not husband and wife, right? So God hates divorce. And there's no question about it. That's what was happening in the days of Malachi. But again, these were supposed to be God's children, right? People of God. If I'm a father, where's my honor for this law? I hate divorce. Well, God will be all right with it if we divorce, right? No big deal. Question number 10 here. How had Israel wearied God? There were two things that they were saying that wearied God. Yeah, with their words. And what were they saying?
Basically, evil is good.
Yeah. You think God ever gets tired of hearing that? We hear it in our world today, don't we? You know, people do sinful, wicked things, violate God's commandments. Oh, it's all right. They're good with God. No big deal. But I mean, you think about these people here and what they were doing. It was you know, they were doing all these different things. They were offering defiled sacrifices. They were marrying foreign people, foreign nations that God told them not to intermarry with. They were divorcing their spouses. God says, don't do this. They were robbing God. That comes a little later in chapter 3. They weren't bringing in the tithes and the offerings that they were supposed to bring. And then they say, you know what? You did these bad things, but you're good with God. You're okay. And so you can understand God's frustration throughout the book of Malachi here. All right, well, the faithful few, I'm just going to skip down here because we're out of time, but the faithful few, God gave them a great assurance in question 15 here. This is the way it always is. You know, there's going to be a few, even though in general Israel wasn't doing what God says, there were still some people who were. And basically what God tells them there is, I'm keeping a record. You know, you may think nobody sees what you're doing, but I see what you're doing. And I'm keeping a record of those things, and you know, your neighbors might be laughing at you. Everybody else might be thinking you're nuts by doing what I told you to do, but you're not wasting your time, because in the end, I'm gonna reward you. And you know, that's a great encouragement for us too, because it's easy to become discouraged in difficult times, isn't it? It's easy to become discouraged when the crowds are small, when you think, well, what I'm doing here is not making a difference, or it's going unnoticed. God sees it, and He's keeping a record, and He says you're going to be rewarded. You're going to be rewarded. So, all right. Anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions?